Okay, so I'm back with thematic focus for chapter 9, and this is our chapter focused on race. So I begin this actually with the world of anthropology, and this is the AAA, the American Anthropological Association's project on race. And they created this project a number of years ago because they were concerned with the lack of scientific evidence that was not being applied when people thought about race and ethnicity. And to differentiate, we say that race is a presumed notion about biological or genetic origins of peoples, and ethnicity would be all the trappings, the folkways, the cultural belief systems, the religious associations, the patterns of dress, the behaviors and performances that go along with particular groups in society. People do, is they sometimes assume that something has a racial significance when it really doesn't. And in fact, the AAA's project on race determined that people didn't apply scientific understandings to their analyses, to the considerations of race. And in fact, they very often didn't conduct analyses per se when they were thinking about race. Race is something that's often very invisible to us. We don't understand it if we are maybe not the victim of, say, police profiling or driving while black or any of the other number of issues that have been brought up in U.S. society and many other societies that disproportionately impact other populations. Sometimes populations different from ourselves. And this goes along, I think, very nicely with our chapter on stratification, chapter 7, because we sometimes see that there are correlations between issues of race and then forms of stratification or inequality in society. So the AAA project, I think, is a good introduction to some of these issues because it challenges some of our own predispositions and stereotypes that we have that we're often very unwilling to more critically analyze in the worlds around us. So here's some questions for you. Question 1, what are some assumptions about race and ethnicity that you take for granted, and how are assumptions of these sorts forms of bias? Question 2, have you ever thought about the fact that actions that seem innocent to you, such as a simple compliment to another person, could be forms of prejudice? I use the second one because more and more, and you'll find some readings, supplemental readings that I've included for this chapter's discussions for the week. You can take a look at those certainly if you like. But I included some readings on microaggressions. What are microaggressions? Well, they're basically examples where people think they're giving a compliment to another person, or they ask them a question that's very inappropriate or not thought out from the beginning. They didn't think about what are the ramifications of asking this question to this person, because they haven't thought about sensitivity. So if someone asks, so, like, what are you? Is that appropriate? What if you ask a person when people think it's, or what if you say to a person, or reflect on when people think it's weird that I listen to Carrie Underwood? So you don't fit the bill of someone who listens to Carrie Underwood. What does that say about the person who makes that assumption? Or someone has this reflection, this girl sitting next to me moves to sit closer to someone else talking to, someone else she's talking to, and this white guy whispers loudly that she moved because I smell like rice. Say about the person who asked that question. What does that say about the world around us? So microaggressions are forms of insult or forms of aggression that happen on the micro-sociological level. They happen in day-to-day interactions, and very often people think if you ask a question of a person, if you say to a person who isn't, because of their background, assumed to be articulate or whatever, if you say to that person, oh, you are so articulate, and you think, I'm complimenting that person. Well, guess what? You might actually be insulting that person, and you might be committing a form of microaggression of which you were unaware. So it's an opportunity then to use this chapter and these resources that we're developing this week to more critically think about the worlds around us. And then there's a third and related question. 3, have you considered the idea that racism and associated forms of bias, privilege, and prejudice are much more than one person's meanness or insensitivity towards another person, and are, instead, forms of oppression of a systemic nature? What we often do in the world around us is we assume that because we're not mean to someone of a different race or ethnic background or different orientation, that the world must reflect the reality that we live in. Well, by studying sociology and going through up through now 9 chapters of this text, I hope we understand that that in fact is not true. In fact, we don't always reflect the social worlds around us. There isn't always this mirroring effect that if I look at other people, they're going to be just like me and me just like them. That is not the reality of how the world works, and that's why we take sociology. So related to this is the idea that we have to understand some of these forms of oppression. Going back to the last chapter on gender, including this chapter on race, that things are of a systemic nature. It's not just about a person's individual meanness. There are systems in society that correlate with economics, that correlate with popular culture, that correlate with political systems, that correlate with education, such as whether a teacher calls on a particular person or not because of their race or ethnicity, that suggests it's not about individuals. It's not about individual meanness or prejudice. Those are bad things or those are good things depending on what happens in those circumstances. But there are systems that are determinate and constituent, meaning that they involve all of us, whether or not we choose to take actions or not in terms of the social worlds of ethnicity and race that we experience around us. So these are 3 questions I hope you'll ponder and reflect upon this week, and feel free to incorporate these in your discussions as appropriate.